Today, a man on leave from the army, out having fun with his friends and family, and then later in a nightclub, he had the misfortune to come into contact with an aggressive man, seemingly looking for trouble, with shocking results. Jack Mitchell was a 24-year-old signaller with the 32nd Regiment Royal Artillery, and he was on a month's leave with the army after 6 months in Kenya. He was loving army life, thoroughly enjoying his time in the forces, but it was always nice to get home to see his close friends and his family. In February 2017, he was back in his local town of Stroud, and on Saturday the 4th, he planned to spend the day relaxing in the town with friends and family. Rugby was a huge passion of his, and Jack started the day watching his local rugby team, Painswick RFC, who he had played for, in their game against Stroud Rugby Football Club in Painswick, before he then watched some of the England-France Six Nations match on TV. After a tight victory for England, in a happy mood, Jack headed to the Lord John pub in Russell Street for a drink with his dad Julian, his great-uncle Chris Finch, and other friends. CCTV showed them entering the bar happy and in great spirits, just enjoying their Saturday evening. Stroud was actually very busy on this Saturday, and another man enjoying himself that day in a pub just around the corner, the Curio Lounge in King Street, was 29-year-old Jake Davis. He too lived locally and had a son with his partner, and after studying sports science and playing for a local football team, he now was a plumber. He was enjoying his Saturday and had already been in a couple of other pubs earlier in the evening. And although he'd never met Jack Mitchell before, they both tended to go to a lot of the same places and knew some of the same people. You know how it is. At 11:15 p.m. to round off the evening, Jack headed to the Warehouse nightclub in Stroud with friends, including his pal Julie, for some more drinks and a dance. CCTV picked up Jack as he handed in his coat at the cloakroom, then he and his friends headed off upstairs to the dance floor. It was less than an hour later that Jake Davis also entered the club with two of his mates. Jack and his friends were enjoying themselves, having a few drinks and lots of laughs. At one point just after 2 a.m, Jack and his friend Julie hit the dance floor and they did some of the stupid dancing, as it's called, just having fun, lunging and dancing back to back, as you can see in any UK nightclub on a Saturday night late on. But this brought him into contact with Jake Davis, who was also on that dance floor. Now, Jake wasn't impressed at all. He didn't like seeing Jack and his friend enjoying themselves, and when they knocked into him, it's just a minor bump that all of us will have experienced in a crowded venue. He told Jack in no uncertain terms to watch what you're doing. A brief standoff ensued between the two men, but the incident seemed to have diffused when a member of the door staff intervened and the two then parted ways. Jack went to the bar, but when a couple of minutes later he returned to the dance floor, Jake Davis approached him and he threw a punch at Jack. Now, Jake had done a bit of boxing and is a decent-sized unit, so this punch had more than a bit of power. Jack didn't see it coming, or even have the chance to break his fall, and he went straight down to the ground and didn't get up. Davis stood over Jack lying prone on the floor, still bristling with aggression, for a good 20 or 30 seconds before turning and walking away. Jack was clearly in a seriously bad way. 999 was called, and paramedics soon arrived at the scene. They found Jack had no pulse and began to administer CPR. But despite doing all they could to save him, Jack was pronounced dead at 3:06 a.m. as he lay in the foyer of the nightclub where just before he'd been having a great time with his friends. His dad, Julian, had by now been picked up and taken to the scene by police, and he was with his son as he died. An autopsy revealed extensive blood on Jack's brain from a half-centimetre hemorrhage. There was also a small abrasion to the right of his nose, a small split to his lip, and an abrasion to his right ear. Injuries consistent with the blow that he'd taken to the face. Let's go back to the warehouse club on the night in question, straight after the punch had been thrown. And soon after, CCTV shows a very poignant scene, I think, of Davis walking away from the nightclub as the medical professionals desperately tried to save Jack behind him. He didn't even stop to collect his coat as he left the club, but a doorman spotted him and asked him for his details, and Davis gave him a false name. The quick-thinking doorman informed police that this was someone who should be spoken to. He was pulled to one side and taken to the police station. Davis was arrested on suspicion of GBH and later that morning of murder. He was interviewed in the early afternoon and told police that the whole incident just happened in seconds, although it was actually almost 2.5 minutes between the first altercation and the fatal punch, all of which had been captured on CCTV. When told that his punch had killed Jack, he insisted he acted in self-defense as he thought that he was going to get hit. And he hadn't been looking for Jack after the initial altercation on the dance floor when he'd been bumped into. But he said he was actually going to the toilet when he saw Jack looking angrily at him, and so he hit him first before he got punched. Something not supported by CCTV evidence. The other thing to point out here that is in conversations with the police before he found out that Jack was dead, Davis didn't once ask how he was. You'd have done that, wouldn't you? Isn't that the first thing you'd have asked? But all he wanted to know was what this situation meant for him. At his trial, the prosecution would say that this was because Davis had no remorse whatsoever for what he had done and was a deeply selfish character who only cared about what would happen to him. Jake faced trial at Bristol Crown Court initially for the murder and then for the manslaughter of Jack Mitchell. And in his evidence, Davis continued with the claim of self-defense all through his trial, saying that he feared that he was going to be attacked, although Jack had his hands by his side and what appeared to be a drink in his hand at the time the punch was thrown. Davis told the court he'd only had 4 drinks that evening, although as his night started at 6 p.m. and he was 2.5 times in excess of the drink driving limit when arrested, this was strongly disputed by the prosecution. A number of witnesses were called to speak of Jake Davis's good character during the trial. They told how he was a very good partner and father, and a relaxed, sociable person who does not get involved in fights on nights out. It seemed that the violence of that evening was totally out of character for him. The jury, having heard the evidence, retired, and on their return, Davis was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison, depriving his son of his father during these crucial early years. The judge told him, "Nearly 10 months ago, you ended the life of a promising young man. He was a wonderful son, a family member and friend. A soldier in the army, whose career promised to go places. He was enjoying well-earned leave. On the 5th of February, having been annoyed by trivial events, we saw how you took up a boxing stance and a doorman intervened. I don't accept there was any provocation. You were 2.5 times the drink drive limit. I reject the evidence that you drank 5 pints in 8 hours." The verdict was no cause for celebration for Jack's family and friends. And Jack's family provided very emotional victim statements. But let me just share a few words spoken by his dad, Julian, who said the following. "I was taken to the warehouse to see my son die," he said, watching police, paramedics and door staff trying to save his life. I could hold Jack and say goodbye, but by the time the rest of the family arrived, Jack was declared a crime scene and no one was allowed to touch him. The sense of helplessness is overwhelming, he said. Soon after this trial, we're going to have to choose Jack's headstone for his grave. We travelled all over Gloucestershire, Twickenham, Cardiff, Spain, and all over following Painswick, Gloucester, and England rugby together. There are many things that will no longer happen. We plan to take in Le Mans this year. We attended 22 of the last 24 air shows at Fairford. I attended on my own for the first time this year, which was a very difficult experience. Jack's death was devastating to those who knew him and the wider community. Stroud and local towns raised more than £5,000 in Jack's name, and with each passing year a memorial match is played at Painswick Rugby Football Club to raise money in his name. A large proportion of this fund is to support the children he had seen when he volunteered in the orphanages in Kenya that made such an impression on him when he was in the army. This fund has enabled a number of girls to have a scholarship to high school in the East African country, showing that he's still having a huge impact on people's lives and his memory lives on. And as for Jake Davis, he'll be out of prison now, still a relatively young man, living his life and enjoying all those moments he took from Jack and his family with his aggression in that nightclub on that fateful evening. And the family and friends of Jack Mitchell aren't the only ones who've suffered with similar incidents. He's one of many men who've lost their lives due to just one punch. When will people on a night out realise that throwing even just one punch can destroy so many lives forever, including their own? I hope you found this video of interest. If so, please do watch one of my others. Until next time, I've been Adam Lloyd.